All right, pouvez-vous lever? The International Criminal Court is now in session. La danse à la Cour pénale internationale est ouverte. Please be seated. Veuillez vous asseoir.
Good morning, everyone. Court officer, please call the case.
Good morning, Mr. President, Your Honors. This is the situation in the Central African Republic 2 in the case of the prosecutor versus Alfred Yekatom and Patrice Edouard Ngai. Case reference ICC 0114, 0118, and for the record, we're in open session.
Thank you very much. I ask for the appearance of the parties. Mr. van der Poel for the prosecution first.
Good morning, Mr. President, Your Honors. Good morning, everyone. The prosecution is represented today by Sylvie Wakcham in the back with Thomas Oya, Yassine Mosfa, Pierre Belbenoit Avik, Maria Berdenikova, Lucio Garcia, Olivia Straubin, and myself. Good morning.
Thank you. Ms. Rabesantratana.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Président.
Good morning, Your Honour. Ladies and gentlemen on the bench, good morning to one and all. The legal representatives, Paulina Masida is representing them, and myself, Elizabeth Rasibazana.
Mr. Sepoun.
Good morning, Mr. President. Good morning, Your Honors. The former child soldiers are represented by myself, Dmitry Supron. Thank you.
I turn to the defense. Ms. Dimitri next.
Good morning, Mr. President. Good morning, Your Honors. Good morning, everyone. Mr. Yekatom is present in the courtroom, represented today by Ms. Sarah Bafadel, Ms. Anta Gisse, Ms. Sabrine Bessat, Mr. Guillaume Suzuki, and myself, Milan Dimitri.
And Mr. Knopes, please.
Very good morning, Mr. President, Your Honors. Good morning, everyone in the courtroom. The defense team, Ms. Ngasona, is almost in its entirety in the courtroom. The first row, on the right side, is Ms. Chiara Giudici, Michael Rouse. On my left side, Barbara Matsula, Marie-Hélène Proux, Mrs. Knopes Hamburger, Carrie, Jasmina Eleftherio, Matthias Goffet, Sarah Peterson, Lena Guidou, Justine Kret, and Melissa Beaulieu. That was maybe one of my last tests as counsel to enumerate all the team members.
But you've done well. Thank you very much, Mr. Knopes. As requested, the Chamber gives today Mr. Ngasona the opportunity to exercise his right to make an unsworn statement in his defense according to Article 67, paragraph 1H. Mr. Ngasona, you may remain seated if you wish to do so. You have the floor.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you, Presiding Judge. Your Honors, distinguished members of the Court. I am very honored, Your Honor, and I would like to thank you most sincerely for giving me this opportunity to address you and the Court today. This day will remain immortal in my life, and I thank you for it. Your Honors, as you have seen on the screen, this is the outline for my statement today, which starts with an introduction and ends with the elections in Bangui. Your Honors, my name is Edouard Patrice Ngai. I was arrested in Paris at the Roissy-Charles de Gaulle airport, further to an arrest warrant issued by the International Criminal Court on the 12th of December 2018, and that at 5 a.m. as I got off the plane, and I was transferred to the ICC detention centre on the 23rd of January 2019, where I remain to this day. Your Honours, I was born on the 30th of June 1967 in Ombello, Mpoko, in Bimbo. I am an engineer specialised in water and forests, an operator in the economy, and I have held the following positions. Acting head of the National Fish Farming Extension Service at the Lanja Fish Farming Centre in Bangui, head of the Equipment and Financial Department at the Ministry of Waters and Forests, and in 2013 I was appointed Minister for Youth and Sport, Arts and Culture. And now I'd like to turn to the various elections where I succeeded in being elected to a position. I became a Member of Parliament for the 4th arrondissement of Bangui in 2005 and for Nana Bakassa in 2011. I was elected Vice Chairman of the Finance Committee of the National Assembly in 2005 and First Questor at the National Assembly in 2011. Your Honours, I've also held various responsibilities in the world of football. I was elected President of the Stade Centrafricain Club in 1997, elected Vice President of the Bangui Football League in 2002, and President of the Central African Football Federation in 2008. I was elected President of UNIFAC, that is the Union of Central African Football Federations, which includes 8 countries, those being the Central African Republic, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Congo-Brazzaville, Cameroon, Gabon, Equatorial Guinea, Chad, and Sao Tome and Principe. And that was in 2017. I was also elected member of the CAF Executive Committee in 2018. I turn now to other appointments I've held in the world of sports. I was Vice Chairman in charge of organising the African Youth Cup of Nations. That was a CAF competition. That was in 2017. I was a member of the FIFA Club World Cup Organising Committee from 2012 to 2017. Member of the Committee for Member Associations of FIFA in 2017. Member of the Confederation of African Football Organising Committee for the African Cup of Nations in 2018. I also held a number of honours. I was awarded the honour of Commander of the Central African Order of Recognition in 2004, Commander of the Central African Order of Merit in 2005, and Gold Medal of the Central African Order of Sporting Merit in December 2009. Your Honours, distinguished members of the Court, allow me to explain to you and to the Court the events which I experienced and what I witnessed of the events that shook the Central African Republic, as well as what the people of the Central African Republic themselves went through. I'd like to talk to you about the beginning of the crisis back in 2012 and the Seleka coup d'etat. First of all, the Central African crisis did not start with the period when former President François Bozizé was in power. I will, however, try to focus on the period relating to the charges against me, Your Honours. When this major crisis organized by the Seleka Coalition started in 2012, more specifically on the 10th of December 2012. I wasn't in Bangui, rather I was in Tokyo in Japan for the Club World Cup, for which I was a member of the organizing committee. And there I followed the events like everyone else on television from my hotel room. It was on the 22nd of December 2012 that I returned to Paris, where I spent Christmas with my family. On the 26th of December 2012, I was on an Air France plane bound for Bangui, when 2 hours into the flight, we were told that the flight was going to turn back to Paris Charles de Gaulle Airport, as the security situation in Bangui was such that the plane could not land. And that's what's happened. We returned to Paris Roissy Charles de Gaulle, where we were taken care of by the airline. The airline put us up in a hotel on the outskirts of Roissy. And the airline offered each passenger the opportunity to choose an itinerary that would take them back to their own country. I chose to go to Douala and then from Douala to Bangui. The next day, on the 27th of December, I boarded the Air France plane bound for Douala. We took off at 10 a.m. and arrived in Douala at 4:20 in the afternoon. Once there, and after a great deal of effort, I managed to catch the only flight available to Bangui on the same day, and that with Sky Airline.
Dans le pays.
It was almost 7 p.m. when I arrived in Bangui, and I could feel the tension in the country as the Seleka advanced, committing atrocities as they moved through the interior of the country. These atrocities were relayed to us by community radio stations and Radio Ndekeluka. Your Honours, all Central Africans were overcome with fear, myself included. The pressure from the Seleka on the government and on the civilian population was permanent. At that time, also, Radio Ndekeluka gave a horrific account of how the Seleka had beheaded a civil servant working in Bria. The Seleka at first asked him to crawl like a goat on all fours before slitting his throat. This account was like a cold shower. That was the effect that it had on all Central Africans. It also gave rise to a number of peaceful demonstrations calling on the international community to help the Central Africans to halt the progress of the columns of calamity that were moving across Central African soil. Your Honours, I took part in the demonstration in January 2013 to call for peace for my country and to call upon the then head of state, François Bozizé, to enter into a dialogue with their leaders to stop the worst that was about to happen in the country. However, that initiative came from all the MPs at the time, which is why a peaceful march was organized in support of the dialogue that was planned to take place in Libreville, in Gabon. The people of the Central African Republic thought that dialogue would resolve the situation. But, as it transpired, there was a well-organized plan to bring down Bozizé's regime, using any means that they saw fit to achieve that end. The rebellion started very suddenly, at the very moment that the Bozizé government granted the right to exploit black gold in the Grand Nord region, with a view to developing that region. But the real reason, which they don't want you to understand, is that an invisible hand pushed this rebellion. The prosecutor is willfully turning a blind eye when it comes to those who are really responsible for the repeated crises in the car. Your Honours, the Seleka are a mix of mercenaries from Chad, Sudan, and Niger, and a minority of Central Africans from the far north of our country, the Central African Republic, they being led by Michel Chotoja.
Son passage.
This rebellion destroyed everything in its path: killing, raping, torching, destroying religious facilities, civilian states, all targeted. Coups d'etat have been a recurring occurrence in our country, Your Honours, but they had never led to this level of chaos before. Bangui is the centre of political power, and if Bangui were to fall into their hands, it would be all over. So why invade the whole country with heartless people to sack and bleed the poor people who had nothing to do with politics? Why were they targeting certain categories of people, including the Gbayas? Your Honours, they had precise demands that were understood by all Central Africans. I recognise that the far north of the Central African Republic is more often isolated during the rainy season, and this has been the case since the country's independence. And that is a legitimate grievance of the inhabitants of that region. But why is it that just when the government in Bangui recognized the problem, gave it recognition, and signed a contract with China to explore and exploit the oil in the region, why at that very moment did they take up arms? It doesn't make sense. Is it that someone does not want the Chinese to exploit the oil for the good of the country and of the region? That's what we have to try and ascertain. They took advantage of the 2011 elections and used them as an opportunity to start this war in the Central African Republic. But the question I ask myself is this really about the 2011 elections? In my opinion, the answer is no. It was a carefully designed plan to destabilize the country. In Africa in general, the opposition never accepts the results of elections, and the Central African Republic is no exception. The opposition prefers arms to dialogue. Now, Your Honours, what had to happen did happen, despite the agreements made during the dialogue in Gabon. In other words, the red line at Damara, 75 kilometers from the capital, Bangui, was violated. At the time, I was the first questor in the office of the National Assembly, and I was asked to head the department in charge of youth, sports, arts, and culture. I was there for a month and a half. At the same time, I was serving my second term in the National Assembly, followed by my position as president of the Central African Football Federation. The last official event I attended was the festivities on the 15th of March 2013 at the 20,000-seat complex. Those festivities were attended by the heads of the Republic's institutions. Then I fell seriously ill, Your Honours. I couldn't feel my limbs any longer. I tried to treat myself with pharmaceutical products, but it didn't work. My whole family decided that I should see a traditional healer. My family was obliged to take me to the Lubai region, 25 kilometers from Mbaiki, to a small village called Bombele, to the home of a traditional healer called Ngai Maleka. I was accompanied by several members of my family and my in-laws. These were Fustin Ngai, my younger brother, Frédéric Ngai, Angèle Ngai, my younger sister, and my in-laws, Dieudonné and Antoinette Malasua. They were with me because my state of health at the time was worrying. 3 days later, my wife came from Paris in France. She came straight to be with me. One day after her arrival, at the place where I was being treated, Radio Déclaration was talking about the lightning advance of the Seleka on Bangui, the capital, on Sunday, the 24th of March. At 1 p.m., Radio Déclaration announced that the capital had been taken by the Seleka and that their vehicles were moving around the town. Immediately afterwards, my younger brother, Frédéric Ngai, received a call from Bangui asking him to tell me to leave where I was because the Seleka were looking for me. Everyone was overcome with fear. I absolutely had to leave where I was in order to be safe. The traditional healer went to get me a motorbike taxi to take me through the forest to the border with the Republic of Congo-Brazzaville. But my youngest sister refused to come with me, preferring to return to Bangui to be with my father. Also, my in-laws, Mr. and Mrs. Malasua, also had to go back to Bangui for their children. So 4 of us took motorbike taxis through the forest on very rough roads, very rough tracks, as far as the Congolese territory, the territory of Congo-Brazzaville. Deep in the bush, one of the motorbike taxi drivers knew the head of the border post very well. So they took us straight to him. The head of the border point received us. I introduced myself and my family. He said to me, I've heard what's happening to you. Then he told me that his wife was from the Central African Republic, So we were like brothers-in-law. He took us in that night, and he realized the state of my health. So without delay, he went to have the pygmies come, and so that they could treat me through the night. At 5 a.m. the next day, he gave me other medicines to help me over the course of my journey. We left the next day at 5 a.m. to arrive in a village where a Congolese logging company was based. The village is called Mouale, and it's on Congolese territory. Now there's a gendarmerie post at the entrance to the village. We were checked there. The gendarme who was there took us to the brigade office. When we arrived at the brigade office, the deputy brigade commander received us. We handed over our passports. Then he left the office to make a telephone call. When he had finished his call, he came back to tell us that the central authorities had agreed to take us in. We stayed in Mouale for 2 days before being taken to Enyele, which is the provincial administrative center, which we call the sub-prefecture. There, when we arrived, we found 6 people who were already there by chance. David Banga, the former CEO of Radio Centrafrique, Landry Dépôt, the former deputy director and current director general of the gendarmerie in Bangui. He was there with his 2 young children. Also, Dieudonné François Batawapi-Yepi, the former sub-prefect of Dekoa, with his son. So together there were 10 Central Africans in all. We spent just one night in Enyele. The next day at 6 a.m., we were taken in a 4-wheel drive pickup truck to Ouessou. We arrived in Ouessou in the evening, where all the arrangements had been made to take us across to the prefecture. At Ouessou, we were taken to a hotel at our own expense for the duration of our stay. Once we had settled into the hotel that night, no one came back to see us. It was only 6 days later that an officer of the Congolese National Police came to tell us that tomorrow you will be received by the authorities. The next day, the police officer came to us to take us to the prefect's residence. And there, to our great surprise, we found ourselves face to face with our late ambassador, Mrs. Fayanga, may she rest in peace, and the Minister for Territorial Administration of Congo-Brazzaville. Once the introductions were over, the ambassador took the floor to tell us this. The authorities of this country cannot allow all those who were responsible during the regime that has just fallen in the Central African Republic to remain here on its soil. So you will have to think quickly and inform us of your final destinations so that the minister can make a decision. End of quotation. So each of us proposed a final destination, I said that once I arrived in Brazzaville, I would take plane tickets for myself and my family to travel to Douala in Cameroon. David Gabanga said the same thing as me. Colonel Landry Depot and the former sub-prefect gave their destination as being the Democratic Republic of Congo. Once everyone had given their destination, she said, okay, but she specified that we would be monitored until we had left the soil of Congo-Brazzaville, and we agreed to that. At the end, I spoke on behalf of the delegation, thanking them for their understanding and telling them that we would be leaving Ouesso the day after their visit. And so it was the next day. We arrived at the bus station at 5:10 in the morning. Given the state of my health, the ticket inspector agreed that we should board first. And at 6 a.m. the bus set off for Brazzaville via Oyo, the village of the President of the Republic of Congo-Brazzaville, Mr. Denis Sassou Nguesso, arriving in Brazzaville at around 11 p.m. In the meantime, Laurent Tagot had booked me into a hotel 5 minutes walk from Brazzaville Airport. We arrived at the hotel at midnight. The next day, my cousin, Laurent Tagot, fought to find us seats with Air Camerco. I would like to express my gratitude and appreciation, and that of my family, to him. When we got to the airport, we learned that the plane was considerably delayed, and we took off at 1 a.m. with a 1-hour stopover in Kinshasa in the DRC, finally arriving in Douala at 3:30 in the morning. After the usual formalities, we left the airport for the Lumière Hotel in Aqua, Douala, where we arrived at around 4:40 a.m.
So, Your Honour, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished members of the court, exile to Cameroon. And when I woke up, I left my room, having showered to get my strength up a bit. After everything I'd gone throughout that painful and arduous journey, I no longer remember the exact date when I left Brazzaville Airport and the exact date of my arrival at Hotel Lumière. That information will be in my diplomatic passport, which I returned to the Ministry for Foreign Affairs. It contains lots of information about my multiple trips when I arrived in Cameroon. At the Hotel Lumière, I met up with the acting consul, Mr. Denis Doumbia, who was sitting down and had been waiting for me, along with some Central Africans and my Camerooni friends, namely Philip Boney, who's a journalist who worked at Channel 2 International at Douala and whose family was at Yaoundé. Dieudonné Mafuo, with whom I'd been doing business throughout a lengthy year, and Cyprian Shidi, who is also a Nigerian businessman in Cameroon. Now, all these people were there, had been awaiting my arrival. Reunited with them, there was an atmosphere of relief, of joy. Seeing me in the flesh dispelled their anxiety. I stayed with them, with my friends, talking about my misadventures, and they all told me that they'd been extremely anxious because they had no news about me and telephones were not getting through. Your Honours, Presiding Judge, members of the court, there had been the problem of my wife's French resident permit. My wife who'd remained in Bangui, and pressed by our children in Paris, we decided to go up to Paris. But my wife had left her French residence permit in Bangui with her big sister, and we needed to have that permit before being able to travel. And when my brother, Abu Kappa Haji, had done everything he could at my sister-in-law's to get hold of the document and send it on through a Central African merchant who used to come to Douala on business. And then there was the state of health of Barnaby Ngosona, my little brother, and my younger sister, Angel Ngosona, which was of great concern to me. And they had to be got out of the country to keep tabs on their health, given that my father was by that point too old and lacked both the strength and resources to look after them. In anticipation of the mass arrival of my family in Bangui, I enlisted the help of my friend, Diodoni Mafuo, to help my little brother, Faustin Ngaisona, to help find 2 houses for rent. And this is what he did for me. He found me a house at Dado in Douala in Cameroon, and a flat in Ndekoti at Douala. Upon arriving in Paris, Your Honours, I stayed almost 3 weeks. I received a telephone call from Faustin Ngaisona telling me that my little brother, Barnaby Ngaisona, has arrived, who at that point was already very ill, and that he had found houses that I'd left instructions to find before my departure. He also asked me to come back quickly to deal with all of that. I explained the situation to my wife and my children, the need to go to Douala, Cameroon, very quickly. During my stay in Paris, I had the unexpected visit of Mr. Joachim Kokate. When he rang at the door, it was my son, Luther Ngaisona, who opened up the door to him and showed him into the room where I was sitting. He was in a desperate state, Your Honour. And I told him that the most important thing was that he was still alive, and that he was lucky enough not to be at Bangui when everything happened. I showed him to what extent I had lost weight, and he said, and I quote, "But those people over there, they're devils. I know them. I know them very well. If they had come across me at Bangui, they would have cut me into tiny pieces after what I said against them at Brazzaville. It's God that sent me on that mission," end of quote. Whilst he was with me, he asked me whether I'd had news of the former president, President Bozize, and I told Kokati that the president was at the Hotel Hilton, as far as I knew. And he asked me how could he go about visiting him, and I made him no answer on that particular point. There were only 2 of us sitting at the table, and I asked him how he had gone about getting my address, and Kokati told me that he had got my address through his friend, Basil Condon Gibere, the father of the Congodia International. And then Kokati stood up and left. I had never had a meeting with Kokati, neither in France nor in Cameroon. One day in Douala, he called me to invite me to eat at Douala, at the Douala port, to go off and eat with Koya Gubeli. He was with Koya Gubeli, and I refused. What else he did during that time, I know absolutely nothing about. Your Honours, Presiding Judge, I know Kokati. I knew him in the government after the Libreville Accords in Gabon, when he left the Salika Rebellion to come and betray them in Brazizzi's government at the time, and when he was asked to make a statement at Libreville. And that's how he went off with Abaka Sabon, Ringi Logayad, and other persons to set themselves against the Salika leaders. And upon their return, in exchange, he was appointed minister. Now, in the government, from a protocol perspective, Kokati had precedence over me. He was on an official trip when the Salika took Bangui. He stayed in France, but I don't know in what city. And when he was at N'Djamena to represent the so-called anti-Balaka resistant fighters, I really have no idea. During that particular period, if memory recalls, I was in Abidjan in Côte d'Ivoire. Now, the return to Douala. I received a telephone call from Folkestone telling me about the arrival of my younger brother. Do forgive me, says the accused. I then went away from Douala on the 14th of May, and before arriving at Douala, my friend had already arrived with my eldest daughter. As soon as I arrived, I went to join them at the hotel Somatel. I came to see my family, who was at that point in a house surrounded by a fence that I rented in the Dado neighbourhood next to Grand Moulin in Douala. In total, there were 28 people in that particular house, now, where I had taken up lodgings in the Ndakoti neighbourhood behind the lower secondary school, La Rousse Belleville. In all, there were 10 people in my accommodation, including 4 children enrolled into school. And in the big compound, where most of the family was, there were almost 15 children who were going to school. There was a huge load weighing down my shoulders, Your Honours. And as the situation deteriorated in Bangui, many people came into Cameroon, running away from the Salika killings. And that's how I agreed to take in under my roof the former Social Affairs Minister, Mrs. Sayo Bernadette. After that, I also took in the former neighbourhood chief Issa from Boy Rabe, Mrs. Ibrahim, who was with us almost a month at the time of the demise of my younger sister, Angela Ngai. So all those people were sleeping in the house that was fortunately fenced off. Some would sleep in the lounge, others in the veranda. It was very difficult, but these are human beings, and I was duty-bound to bear the load with the little means that I had for my family. I also did it for Central Africans, or the Central Africans who would come to me. Sometimes my family put up some people in the big family concession at Dado without my knowledge. Regarding the villas that has been talked about, Your Honours, I never bought one single house in Cameroon. I don't have one. I only rented a house for my family and an apartment for myself and the other members of the family. Your Honours, upon my return from France on the 14th of May, after having installed the entire family, I had to organise a match fixture between the Central African Republic and South Africa. So I had to make a trip to Yaoundé, where the head office is of the Football Camerooni Federation, since that I had negotiated with the Federation to receive its help for arrangements that had to be made to welcome our guests coming from South Africa. So it was around the 16th or the 17th of May. Staying in Douala wouldn't enable me to set everything in motion to make sure that that championship would go well. And so it was because of that that I decided to go briefly to Yaoundé for the championship. But before leaving Yaoundé, I first asked Mr. Philip Boney to book me a temporary flat for a month's rental so that I could organise the match. Boney rented me a house located near the Yannick Noah complex. The tennis champion, Franco tennisman, in the Togoli neighbourhood in Yaoundé, and that's where I stayed for that match fixture between CAR and South Africa. And when I was at Yaoundé for the match, the health of my younger siblings deteriorated. And once the match was over, around the 13th of June, I told Boney that I was going to leave to meet up with my seriously ill younger siblings. So, Your Honours, my exit from the Central African Republic was not expected, wasn't scheduled. It was a case of force majeure. I left without the requisite resources to look after myself, to look after my family in France. And my father had stayed in Bangui with the children of my eldest brother, who had died in 2002. You can see that the Confederation of African Football, at the time, the late President Issa Ayou made me a humanitarian donation of $20,000 American, and the FIFA sent me the same amount. This money enabled me first to help my family and the school fees of my children in France and at Douala. And the lion's share went to look after my younger siblings, whose lives I didn't manage to save, Your Honour, but also received help here and there, which enabled me to survive during my exile. Several times I called Mr. Bertrand Colliers to send me money, and also Celestin Yaninji, Your Honours. Colliers was a go-between between me and the former deputy director of the Morocco Central African Bank, Mr. Ali Shaibu. Today he's the national director of the BEAC, the state banks of Central Africa, because this gentleman preferred that I not call him directly in order to avoid him trouble, because he is he's Djodia's younger brother, and that's why these calls went to Colliers, because Colliers was operating as a go-between. This has nothing to do whatsoever with the popular rising for the Central African resistance. I wanted to say that I never received from the former President Bozizé one single penny. Sometimes I helped those who stayed after him in the Gulf Villa if I had something. Sometimes he would call me because he had nothing to eat, and if the electricity had come down, if there was an electricity outage in the house, I would come to pay for them out of sense of humanity, but without anything in return. What's true is that the situation of my country was of great concern to me. To see it held hostage by a string of foreign mercenaries, forcing its daughters and sons into exile abroad. This was a situation that was very worrying for all Central Africans, irrespective of their religion or their ethnic group, because the crisis hit every corner of Central Africa. If I'm being accused of helping people, I accept that willingly, Your Honours. But it's in my nature, and that's how my father and mother brought me up and taught me. I wasn't brought up, I wasn't taught to commit violence and in a climate of violence. My family never taught me verbal violence, nor nastiness, nor hate. I feel no hate in my heart in respect of my neighbour, because for me, the blood of an innocent is to be protected at all costs and is very dear to God. And for me, it's absolutely out of the question to prompt somebody to hurt his neighbour. When I was in Cameroon, I moved around a lot, Your Honours, for football, to go and see my family in France, but also my friends in Côte d'Ivoire and within Cameroon, and sometimes I would go on the road to buy my family food supplies. For example, cassava, gobos, jute, smoked meats, plantain bananas, yams, taro, etc., etc. Regarding all my trips outside of Cameroon, you'll find evidence to that effect in the passports I had at the time, and even in the diplomatic passport that I was asked for and that we're still waiting to receive, despite all the efforts made by my defence team to obtain that document, but as yet in vain. Cooperation requests remain a dead letter to this day, Your Honours. To this day, that diplomatic passport has been mysteriously mislaid, or it's disappeared, while it was only in 2016 that I handed it back. At the Douala airport, that's where I did all my trips from when I was in Cameroon. Your Honours, honourable members of the bench, in Cameroon, I never saw nor met Adrien Poussou, Zokwe Hisene, Marshal Wango, Gwerson Unyangandekoe, Levi Yakite, Ngai Cosette Eugène, or Marshal Gaulo. It's true, I met and saw a number of Central African nationals in Yaoundé when I was preparing that football fixture in Douala. Many Central Africans, many struggling Central Africans would come and see me for help, and I would willingly answer that call at the time if I had some resources to offer, however small. And there were lots of Central Africans who came to help me during after the death of my little brother, Barnaby Ngai in July 2013, and that of my younger sister, Angele Ngai in the beginning of September 2013. I kept her body at the morgue in the Daidai hospital in Douala because in July I had sent Barnaby's Ngaisona's dead body in Bangui, and his body had been desecrated by the Seleka when they arrived in the Bangui Mbokpuku airport. And that's why I didn't want a second time to see the desecration of another member of my family's body.
Monsieur le Président, Madame, Monsieur.
Your Honours, as regards the meeting in Paris, I'm now going to explain matters to you regarding the meeting in Paris, the meeting which led to Froca. As my family in France could not attend the funeral of my younger brother Barnabé in ssona, owing to a lack of money, I was obliged to go to Paris in France to grieve with them towards the end of July 2013. When I arrived at the house in Saint-Pierre-du-Perret, there were many Central African nationals who came to help me. Information was circulating. It was said that a rally was being organized in Paris to which all Central African nationals were invited. Mr. Lin Banu Kepa, who I knew from before because he was the lawyer who had assisted my family in regularizing their French residence permits, well, he had called me to inform me about this gathering. When I arrived at the place where the meeting was held, on the 3rd of August, I saw many Central Africans of different ethnicities and religions, including Lin Banu Kepa, Jean-Serge Wafio, Commander Kogbo, the Treasurer General of the KNK, Hadja Mabula, Mr. Ngubo Guillaume, François Bozizé and his sons Francis and Socrates, and many other people I don't recall. There were almost 30 of us. I don't remember exactly. Now, no agenda had been prepared prior to the meeting, Your Honours, but Lin Banu Kepa took the floor to explain that he himself had initiated the gathering and that the situation in our country was of concern to us all, and that as President Bozizé was in France, he might be received by the French authorities, and that the contribution of all Central Africans on the ground could be useful in supporting the President's efforts. End of quotation. He wondered what could be done to draw the international community's attention to the chaotic situation in the country. It was Lin Banu Kepa who came up with the idea that to have our voice heard here in Europe, we needed to have a legal status that would enable us to knock on the doors of all the political authorities in France and in Europe. So that was the reasoning that we were given. Then after Lin Banu Kepa had spoken, President Bozizé took the floor to say that he thought that what Mr. Lin had just said was correct and was logical. Several people took the floor, but I myself did not speak at the meeting. What I do know is that Mr. Guillaume Ngubo took the floor to say, President, it's preferable that we have a structure on which we can rely in conducting our various approaches. End of quotation. So at that point, everyone agreed that the proposal was a good one. And so it was that the name Frocca was arrived at. And the remit of the Frocca was to collect information on what was happening in the Central African Republic and to inform the international community and diplomatic missions of that information. Now, nothing military was mentioned at that meeting, Your Honours. We only discussed the diplomatic and political aspects. This was also the only meeting I attended in Paris. And at that point in time, I didn't know Poussou. Was he there? I don't know. That was the first and last time I attended a meeting in Paris or in France. Other than that, I simply took advantage of my football-related travels to extend them with stays in Paris to be with my family. Now, as regards the alleged meetings of Bozizé's so-called circle, now, I know nothing about that, nor do I know where President Bozizé was staying in Paris. At the time, I didn't know Maxime Mokom, so I can't speak of him. And I never met the former Director General of the BEAC in Paris, Yvan Songuet. That's the truth, Your Honours, even if one seeks to distort reality. Indeed, I think that here in Europe, nothing can escape attention if one is determined to know the true facts. The prosecutor should have tried to find out where former President Bozizé was staying in Paris during that period, and also should have asked the hotel where he was staying if Mr. Ngai ssona had visited the hotel. What is more, there are security systems in these places. It would be best to consult the CCTV footage, as in Yaoundé in Cameroon, to corroborate Poussou's story. Also, Poussou came here to say that he was in telephone contact with me. That is simply and absolutely not the case. It's not true. It would be very easy to check whether I ever called Poussou or he me in 2013. There were no such calls, Your Honours, and therefore you will find no such records. You will not find any communication with a certain Poussou during that period, Your Honours. Furthermore, I don't go to cafes or bars, and at no time during that period did I go to any cafes on the Champs-Élysées in Paris. Once again, the prosecutor could have checked the geolocations of our two telephones to ascertain whether I was ever with Poussou in the places he speaks of. Your Honours, one day I received a call from Lynn Banukepa when I was in Douala. He told me that he had collated information in the form of a memorandum that he had wanted to send to the Secretary General of the United Nations in New York, but that the person who had submitted or who had relayed the memorandum had betrayed us. He explained that the idea had been that Yvan Songuet submit the memorandum, but that Socrates Bozizé had proposed a certain Poussou, who he considered to be someone with knowledge of the United Nations, and that with him we would have a better chance of the memorandum reaching the hands of the Secretary General of the United Nations. Lin went on to say that when Poussou arrived in New York, he had in fact delivered the document to the incumbent Seleka Prime Minister rather than to the UN Secretary General. I noticed that once again it was Socrates. He was always going to betray his father with his cousins. It's very unfortunate, an unfortunate state of affairs. That's what I said. So this was the first time I'd heard the name Poussou, and the first time I had telephone and physical contact with him was when he was appointed to the Prime Minister's staff by Prime Minister Mahamat Kamoun in 2014. It was Prime Minister Kamoun who gave him my telephone number so that he could call me, and I took the opportunity to record his number then, and you will find his number in my telephone contacts. Your Honours, I would like to say a few words about the period of Totoje's resignation. I would like to tell you something about my short stay in Yaoundé to collect my visa. I also encountered Bernard Mokoum in Yaoundé. He is the son of a woman from my village, the village of Nana Bakassa. We call each other cousin in the broadest sense, but in reality, we have no familial ties. We would sometimes bump into each other in the street and talk, but at the time I didn't know her children. One day, towards the end of November, early December 2013, I went to Yaoundé to collect my visa so that I could travel to Morocco as part of my efforts to organize the Club World Cup in Marrakesh in Morocco, which was to start on the 7th of December 2013. And as he was in financial difficulty, he asked me to give him some money to buy credit for his phone. Now, that day he wanted to call someone and he didn't have any credit. And as I was with him, I lent him my phone. He moved away from me to talk on the phone. When he'd finished talking, he said to me, "Cousin, your grandson wants to say hello." I took the phone from him, and for the first time in my life, I spoke to Maxime Mokoum, and he said, "Ata." In Sango, Ata means granddad. And I said also, "Ata, how are you?" He replied that he was okay, but that he was hungry. I told him that the situation was very tough, pretty much everywhere. He told me that his father had relayed to him what had happened to my younger siblings and how they had died. At the end, I asked him if I could keep his number. He agreed to that, which is why his number is in my contacts. I don't know anything else about him, Your Honours, because I don't know him personally. I don't know his job title, let alone his profession. I don't know him from Adam. I don't know if he has a military background, for instance. But when I returned to Bangui on the 14th of January 2014, I didn't see him. He only arrived in February. Your Honours, there's one thing that I'd like to make clear to you, Your Honours, about my relationship with Bernard Mokoum. We saw each other very rarely in Bangui because each of us was occupied with his work. He is the younger brother of President François Bozizé, but he had a bad time under the Bozizé regime. Bozizé had thrown him in prison. He was then released a year and a few months later. So even in Cameroon, when I was in Yaoundé to prepare for the South Africa versus Central African Republic match, he came to see me to complain about his situation. And from time to time, I would help him. Sometimes he even asked for my telephone to call people, and I gave it to him. And so it was that if he was in difficulty, I would come to his aid, not only him, but all exiled Central Africans who would approach me if I was able to. So to wrap up on the matter of the visa, I visited the Moroccan embassy with the economic advisor from the Central African Republic embassy in Yaoundé to collect my visa. Once I'd collected it, I went straight back to Douala. Now, Presiding Judge, Your Honours, concerning the attack of the 5th of December, all the media, the French, Cameroonian and Central African media had been talking for a long time about this imminent attack on the 5th of December 2013. It wasn't a secret. And after the attack, everyone was calling their relatives, trying to get news of their families and the situation in Bangui in general. On the 7th of December 2013, I took an Air France flight to Marrakesh via Paris, Charles de Gaulle Airport, and I stayed there until the 22nd of December 2013, which actually was the end of the tournament. I then went straight to Paris to spend Christmas with my family. After the Christmas celebrations, I wanted to spend New Year's Eve with the other part of my family who were in Douala. And so it was that on the 28th of December 2013 that I returned to Douala and spent New Year's Eve with my family before going to see my friends at the Ivorian Football Federation in Abidjan in January 2014. I visited them to seek their help. It was in Côte d'Ivoire that I saw on the France 24 television channel that the leader of the Seleka, Michel Djotodia, had resigned in N'Djamena in Chad. I immediately started calling people in Bangui to apprise myself of the situation in my country. I also called several members of my family, as well as the former Minister of State, the late Cyriaque Gonda. After I left Abidjan for Douala, and I started to think about how to get back to my country. My younger brother, Abba Gonifio Fulbert, who is a colonel in the customs service, reassured me that I could return home without fear and that the situation was calm. Now, before that call, I had also received a call from Sébastien Wenezui, telling me to come down because he had received a visit from the Whites. And they had asked him who should run the country if Djotodia resigned. He had immediately thought of me, and that's why they asked him to tell me to come back promptly. Your Honours, I asked him, why me? He replied that he had explained to them that I was much loved by young people in the country because of my role in football, and that I could bring peace and social cohesion back very quickly. And that's why he was calling me. I asked him to give me some time to think about what he had just told me. After hanging up, I tried to contact some people in Bangui to get their views, and I discussed the matter with some members of my family in Douala, in France, before deciding to return to Bangui. After I went into exile, my father could no longer live freely in Bangui. He and the rest of my family were terrorized by the Seleka. He no longer lived in the family compound. Rather, he had fled the house to take refuge in the Ndamala neighborhood in Bangui, where he continued to be hunted down. So, unable to continue living in Bangui, he had fled to hide in Bossangoa with my older brother, Celestin Vilbozumna. But the situation there was just as untenable. I was informed about the situation in Bossangoa by the former Minister of State, the late Syriac Gonda. Now, as he was a member of the Transitional National Assembly, I begged him to do everything he could to go and find him and bring him back to Bangui, to his place, and protect him. That was around October 2013, about 2 weeks after the Bossangoa attack. And that's what he did. He took a lot of risks. He managed to find my father at the bishopric and to get him into a vehicle for Bangui. On the way, on the road, my father was almost killed. In the end, it was thanks to the international MISCA forces who accompanied them that my father's life was saved. When he arrived in Bangui, my father refused to sleep at Gonda's house because he felt that when he had been threatened by the Seleka on the road, no one had done anything to defend him. So my father preferred to stay in the Boyrab neighborhood, but he didn't sleep at home. Rather, he slept with helpful people in the neighborhood, and that until Jojo resigned in N'Djamena. From that point on, he returned to the family home and lived there.
Your Honour, honourable members of the bench, I'd like now to address you on the matter of my return to Bangui. Regarding the reasons of my return, I am genuinely appalled to hear here in the prosecutor's narratives that my return to Bangui, to my own country, was intended to espouse the cause of the resistant people called the anti-Balaka. Your Honours, I'm a Central African. Under my country's constitution, the Central African Republic, nobody can be forced into exile. Not only that, my father stayed in the country. He suffered the Seleka persecution, and this had a considerable effect on me during my exile. Despite my trying to persuade him to leave and meet up with me in Cameroon, he refused, and he said that he would prefer dying in his own country. I lost my mother, and now I've only got my father left. Was I simply to abandon him? You can't buy parents, Your Honour, honourable members of the bench. I'd already been separated from him by force for almost 10 months. And to find an opportunity to meet up with him, because I am his sole source of support. So why couldn't I leap on an opportunity to meet up with my only dad that I'd left in circumstances beyond my control? Only a deranged child wouldn't do so. Today, I've lost him because I'm not by his side to look after him, to take care of his state of health, to feed him and a variety of other things. If it's said that I returned to Bangui to join the anti-Balaka resistance, I say no. It's totally over the top and absurd. These resistance people, it was they who came up to me, my humble person, to ask me to help them to have their cries heard by the Central African and international authorities. And I felt it was the call of duty to save my country. It was they who bear witness to the inside workings of the resistant people called the anti-Balaka. They came to tell you my role before this chamber, Your Honours, and not those who invented their story. And at no point in my life I met. Your Honours, honourable members of the bench, I performed this task lovingly to restore peace and to go to the polls, the elections in 2015, 2016, risking my life to do so. I returned to the country on the 14th of January 2014, and before leaving Douala, I asked my little brother, the customs official, Abba Fulbert Gonifio, to buy me a mattress and a mat, and also to see whether at my father's house I could have a room free, because my house had been destroyed by the Salaka. I also informed Sebastian Wenezui of my return to Bangui. And I returned, embarking on a Sky Airline flight, and arrived at Bangui. And on my arrival, I was taken out of the VIP lounge, where I met up with Sebastian Wenezui, Warrant Officer Bafio, Chief Warrant Officer Theodore Koisi, and the President of the political party, the MSCA, Willy Bona, who had come at the behest of the former late State Minister Cyriaque Gonda. He took me in his car to my father's house. Your Honours, with your leave, perhaps I can take a break now. Perhaps in the second session I can continue.
Of course, Mr. Gaisona, I had the same idea, to be honest. Let's have a break until 11:30.
Rise, vous vous levez.